Hello, and thank you for lending your ears to Ratehub.ca's Real Money Talk podcast. In this show, we give you the real talk on all things money. We eliminate the fine print, we junk the jargon, and we explain how you can make smarter financial decisions. We're not millionaires, we're thousandaires, and we know you are too, so this show is for you. We want to talk about money because it affects everyone, rich and poor. Money shouldn't only be the occupation of the 1%, but rather the 99%. Money isn't everything, but it is everywhere. We want to educate about money through story. We Canadians ignore money, hoping if we do, like many other problems, it'll go away. Our goal is to make money an everyday discussion. Today, our guest host is Sandra Martin, editor-in-chief at MoneySense Magazine. Hello, Sandra.
Hi, Tyler.
And our guest today is David O'Leary. David started investing in 1996 at age 18 and enjoyed early success thanks to tech market giants and the internet. After growing his portfolio to $10,000, a lot of cash for an 18-year-old, he was hooked, but not playing with enough cash, so he borrowed to make more. At 25, he was working as a mutual funds analyst after receiving his MBA from Rotman at the University of Toronto, and about to get his chartered financial analyst designation. He then told his parents he needed to file for bankruptcy. Now, David is the CEO of Kindwealth, a fee-only financial planning service. No sales commissions, no contracts, and fair, flat fees. He's been featured on BNN Bloomberg, Financial Post, The Globe and Mail, and MoneySense, to name a few. The best advice for me comes from people with experience. And David has seen the highs and lows of personal finance. So we wanted to reach out to him today. Hello, David.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tyler.
I'm glad you could be here. We always kick things off with our money mistake. So what money makeup or mistake have you made in the last couple of weeks? I'm going to go first. I have 2 young kids at home. And for my son, he's 6, I really wanted to teach him about budgeting and saving up his allowance so that he could buy an iPad to, play his games with. And a friend of mine had told me this grand story about his own son, and he didn't even know it. But his son just came to him and said, "Hey, Dad, I put, $600 together. I want to buy an iPad." And he's like, "That's from your allowance?" And he was blown away. So anyway, the kid bought an iPad. I wanted to do the same. Well, given our current situation and one iPad getting fought over, my wife and I just decided to up and buy one yesterday. And hopefully it resolves problems, but we're waiting for it to come in the mail. But it was kind of a big expense after all the... So I'm calling it a mistake right now, but hopefully it turns out for the best.
It's an investment. Do you want me to go next, Tyler?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, the last time I was on the podcast with you, I had a similar purchase I had just made. I bought a MacBook Pro to replace my personal MacBook, not the one that's work issue, but the one that I do my own personal finances on, that my kid does homework on. And I've been holding on to it. It was considered a vintage machine by Apple and went kaput in the first week of lockdown. So I had to pay a premium to get a new one shipped to me, but it's actually really awesome. So I was calling it a mistake at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's a mistake. It was just me feeling cheap because I didn't want to shell out the money. But the more recent incident involves my car, which is also vintage, like my laptop that died. It's a 2011, but a Subaru Forester that I plan to drive into the ground. That's how I look at things like cars that depreciate. It's still operating fine, but I haven't had to drive anywhere. I live within a 5-minute walk of a grocery store, and even with shopping only once every 2 weeks, I just get one of my kids to meet me there when I'm done, and we pack up a bunch of bags and our backpacks, and we Sherpa all the groceries home. So saving all kinds of money on gas, feeling self-congratulatory. And then one day I had to go pick up some dog food, and the car wouldn't start. So long story short, I had to pay for a tow to take my car to the dealership, where the battery was able to be recharged. I didn't have to buy a new battery, but that was $600 later. Really wish I had just driven my car a little bit every week.
Yeah, that just sucks. David, you got one for us?
Sure, yeah. On a car-related note, we had a really fortunate situation where our car lease actually came due basically around March, and we didn't find another car. We have one other older car that we had 2 cars. One came off lease, the other one we owned. And the one that came off lease, we didn't replace. And so we're really glad now because it was around the time that things were, it's actually just before, but we just hadn't gotten our act together. And we thought, well, we'll try just like doing with just one car for a little while. And now this pandemic hit. So that was like that was not anything that we deserve credit for, but it was very fortunate. On the mistake side, this is fairly esoteric, but it's actually maybe a learning point for people listening to this podcast. So my ongoing mistake is that I don't pay enough attention to my own finances. And when you help other people with their money for a living, sometimes you don't want to dig into your own at the end of a day or week. And it's like a thing you have to just continually like get in the habit of just staying on top of and, being aware of every kind of aspect. And so I go periods where like I'm neglecting my own finances. And so for the manifestation of that problem came back to bite me recently, where I had owned a condo back in like the late 2000s, met my wife, we got married, we ended up moving overseas, we sold the condo. We were away for a while. We came back and we've been renting since we have been back in Toronto. And we're now sort of looking at, well, I wonder whether we could purchase a house, especially if housing prices kind of start to fall. And what happened was I took a home buyer's withdrawal from my RRSP for the condo I bought back in the late 2000s, and was essentially just paying back the minimum amount each year. And I have to double check this figure. I think for 15 years to pay it back. And so I haven't fully paid it back yet. I'm very close to that, but I'd sort of forgotten all about it. And I otherwise qualify as a first-time home buyer again, so that if we now purchase a home, because I sold the condo back in 2012 or 2013. So it's been, 7 years, more than 4 years that I haven't owned a home. So you can actually qualify again as a first-time home buyer, and you can actually make a home buyer's withdrawal from your RRSP. But since I haven't finished paying back the other one, I'm like 1 year away from having repaid it. You can't actually withdraw until you, on January 1st of the year in which you buy a place, you need to have fully paid back any previous home buyer's withdrawals. Oh. And I had just forgotten all about it. I hadn't been thinking about it. And I knew that I would qualify again as a first-time home buyer. So we may now end up having to wait longer than we would like to if property prices fall and we decide we want to buy something. So I'm disappointed in myself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm also a fatalist. Like, yes, you make your own destiny, but really surprised to see how little housing prices have fallen. I mean, granted, it's only been a couple of months, and that could be the result of potential sellers just saying, I'm going to hold off, and those who are still in the market saying, no, I'm holding out for what the market has borne out to this date. But really surprised prices haven't gone down. And same thing with rents are supposed to be going down. But in Toronto, I know somebody who's in a condo development in the Riverside neighborhood. A Facebook friend, I guess, has an income property there and just listed it for $500. The same unit my friend has, listed it for $500 more per month in rent. So maybe that's a one-off. I mean, this is a very limited sampling, but certainly there hasn't been a big sell-off yet anyway. So maybe it's for the best. Maybe prices won't come down till next year, and you'll say thank you yesterday, David, for being forgetful.
I hope so. I hope you're right. And it's actually a reasonable chance of that happening.
I think so, yeah. With like Airbnb, and anyway, we could go down a whole rabbit hole.
Yeah, there is a whole real estate rabbit hole here, isn't there?
So I just wanted to get your story from sort of the early beginnings. Like what fascinated you about money, and what were your interests as a kid? What were you like as a kid?
Oh, well, I only had interest in money in that I wanted it because I knew that it would allow me to get things I wanted. I had always sort of, when people talked about as a young kid, like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? My answer was always doctor or lawyer, because I was told that they make a lot of money. And there was no thought in like, would I actually enjoy doing that? In my defense, I was 6, 7 years old at the time those questions are being asked of me. But, when I started, flashing forward as I kind of got older, I mean, the money messages around our home were that I'll stop and digress here for a minute, because I think it's actually really important to shaping how your relationship with money. But your money messages growing up around our home were, save, 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 get lots of education, because that gives you opportunities for work and higher income, and, protect yourself financially. And it wasn't like save at all expenses. Like, it wasn't hoarding. my parents would spend money on things, and they would buy good quality things, but not a lot of things. When they did, they didn't mind paying up and getting something good quality. But it was, we didn't travel, we didn't like get on a plane and fly anywhere my entire childhood because my parents were paying down their mortgage. And in their defense, interest rates at the time in the early 1980s were, 15 to 18% on their mortgage. And so it made a lot of sense to prioritize paying down the mortgage. But that was sort of they were, flashing back to their childhood. They grew up in kind of Depression era mentality, or not far removed from that type of mentality. And so I think they had some of that, like, this is security and you need to protect yourself. So we kind of grew up with that money message. But I was kind of frustrated by that. I wished we would had more money to spend. And so when I first started to get money, it was always a challenge for me to actually do the same thing as my parents and save it. I liked the idea of, oh, great, I can spend this now. Nobody can tell me what to do with it.
And just a slight segue, but so what are you telling your kids now?
Well, my daughters are I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. The 3-year-old, not a whole lot yet. The 5-year-old, she I'm getting her into, like, say, same type of thing I think my parents did. So it's, save it. I'm trying to let her know that she has like options for, like, there are different things you can do with your money, and it'll be for you to decide what to do with those things. But, do you save it? Do you spend it? Or do you give it? So we try to do, incorporate philanthropy and giving is just, like, really at a really early age, whether that's giving some of their old toys away, or it's donating. But yeah, it's really just around save it because it allows you to do things. It buys you flexibility. I'm not putting it in those terms, but letting her know she's got, choices with what to do with that money. How do you handle that around the house?
Yeah, we do the same. We try, and my son recently wanted to upgrade his train tracks. So it's like, well, let's look on Kijiji, like, you only need a few more tracks. You don't need a new set. And then, he's looking at Hot Wheel tracks the other day and wanted a $150 Amazon thing with a giant shark where the cars fly and crash into each other. But then I found something it's just a much someone, actually a friend, posted that they were giving away Hot Wheel tracks. I'm like, look at this, we can get this for nothing and see if you like it. And then we have done things where we give it away, like pass it down to, like, cousins and nieces and nephews. And then we've also, so we're hopefully teaching it. But
I was going to say, as my kids are older, they're 13 and 17, and we started off very much as you are with your young kids. And I can tell you, it does stay with them. So my 13-year-old she really likes shopping, and I'll say, well, how much money of yours are you going to put towards this? And that always gives her pause, and she'll reconsider, how badly do I want this? And most of the time she decides, oh, I'm just not going to, I think I'm going to hold off until I see something I really, really want. So those lessons early on truly do stay with them. And the key is getting the lessons in early.
What did you do in those early years?
I try and explain the difference between want and need.
Yeah.
I need that. No, you want that.
Yeah, we want that too. I was Sandra. What were some of the things that you did that you think were effective?
I think letting them spend some of their own money. It's a little trickier now, right? Because spending money with a debit card is so much more abstract than spending with cash. But they do need to learn that skill so that when they are faced with their own debit card, it doesn't feel like they're spending within a video game. And I also teach a couple of courses a year at Ryerson. And one of my students this past semester, who was in second year, said, hey, I just like to find what, MoneySense so interesting, because we never learned anything about personal finance in school. So we were chatting about, he said, do you think cash is dead? And I said, my mom always taught me, because obviously very different. I'm Gen X and he's Gen Z, never to leave the house without cash. And I still have a little bit of that feeling in the back of my head in case something goes wrong, technologically speaking. And he said, I've never used cash. I never have cash ever. But on the other hand, he has friends who, there are credit card applications available all over campus. And his friends have applied. Sometimes they get accepted, but they have no idea how it all works. They don't understand that there's a minimum monthly payment. They don't understand that there are repercussions of not making that payment or only making the minimum payment. Having that concrete experience with spending. So maybe you do, when they're really little, start with physical money, and then that once that foundation is set, you can transition to having a debit card. So my
Yeah.
13-year-old, who was walking around with like a lot of cash because she had started babysitting, said, well, we're not really comfortable with this. And I have a bank account for her from when she was a baby. And we decided, it's your money, you earned it. You should have a debit account with a card that you can use for spending. So that's where we are right now.
I was going to say that's all really interesting, and I'm glad to hear those money messages have stayed with your kids. Tyler, I think you started to allude to this, and I found it really effective, is to like bring in the environmental impact of like consumerism into the equation, because my daughter really understands, like, we're really big on kind of social and environmental impact of decisions and the things that we do, and consumption is a big part of that. But like bringing into the equation, like, hey, every time you buy something new, you're essentially manufacturing that thing. And if we can find it used, aside from just that it's cheaper, the environmental impact of that is just so much better. And so that resonates a lot with her. And I wonder whether that might have resonated with me had I thought about that as a kid. Because like the money side of it, I was kind of rebelling a little against the like save mentality. And I wanted to buy things that were new and have that fun. But if I felt guilty about it from like, oh, I'm contributing to destroying the planet, I wonder whether as a younger adult, when I first started to get my hands on my own income and my own money, that I might have been more prudent with it.
I think, but your parents, you said, were focused on when they did buy, they bought quality. And that's not that different from my 17-year-old, who will save up and spend more. She does a lot of thrifting, which grosses me out, but she washes everything before she wears it. But, particularly understanding the environmental impact of denim. But if she occasionally wants to buy something new, she will spend more to get it from a sustainable retailer. Like Frank and Oak, for instance, which is a Canadian company, rather than just buying for the look of it. So I think this generation, and the next generation coming up with your younger kids, that'll be normal to them to think
second
that way.
nature. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right. I hope so.
There's going to be a lot of lessons learned, I think, now in COVID and post COVID, and how the economy is shaping up to be. And I think there's a lot of, unfortunately, I think a lot of people, there's a lot of layoffs coming, and money might be a little bit tighter coming up, and people are going to turn to, credit cards to solve financial problems. But hopefully the lessons that we can instill in them now can help them through this.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about my older daughter is supposed to be heading off to university. I don't think a lot of her friends will physically be going away in September. But that is such a time where, if you're not prepared financially with the fundamentals, where you can get yourself into trouble. And I was thinking about your story, David, where at such a young age, you were still in university, you had to face with declaring bankruptcy. So what was that like? You were still a student. Did your parents help you out? What changed for you when that happened?
I'm trying to think how to answer that question. I mean, in some ways, not a lot, because the story is I had basically accumulated a whole bunch of debt to invest more and more money, and this was around late 1990s, and then the market collapsed, and I essentially was insolvent and couldn't meet all the debt payments that I had, and it amounted to basically a couple $100,000 of debt. And by the time I was actually, that all started when I was 18, and then kind of I realized, I'm going to have to go through bankruptcy, was probably when I was 23 that sort of started, and I think I officially declared it at 24, 25 bankruptcy. So, but by like 23, 24, I kind of know that's happening. But you're a young adult. I'm working full time now at the bank, and I'm just entering the MBA program at U of T. So I'd applied for it, gotten in, and thinking of and realizing I'm going to have to claim bankruptcy all in around the same time. But I had been off for a year working full time. you're in this position now where the bankruptcy like wipes the slate clean. I mean, I think about it as, and I talk about it as a bit of a get out of jail free. Free is too strong a term for it because there is a downside to it, but it's an ability to wipe the slate clean and not allow a mistake that you make, whether as an adult or as in my case a young man, to really set you behind for the rest of your life, to dig out of a hole that that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to dig out from. And so after that happens, you're right back into a position where you're just sort of starting from scratch. And I was young enough that I mean, I think a lot of kids come out, and I was lucky that I didn't really have there wasn't much school debt because my parents had paid for half of my undergraduate tuition, and I'd gone to school at home, and then I had paid the other half. So I was kind of free and clear on my undergraduate. And so you're kind of right back. Like I felt still relatively lucky financially, right? Like I guess I had lost the savings that I had been putting into, and growing even before I started to borrow and really exacerbate it. But it wasn't a huge amount of money. And, to be 24 with no debt is actually, much better than a lot of Canadians can say at that age and stage. And, so your real challenge is just getting access to credit beyond the bankruptcy. Far more of I think the trauma of the experience is emotional and psychological than it is actual real financial vulnerability, if you know what I mean. Like if that makes sense.
Well, I kind of want to ask about that. Like, did people treat you any differently, or like, okay, so you're free and clear of money. You can't have credit cards. I mean, you can still work. You're earning a paycheck, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm like I'd been working at the bank part time throughout my undergraduate. I finished my undergrad, took a year off, was working full time in that year, applied to the MBA. I happened to get in right away. And so I was going to be going basically I was going to be off for one full school year, working full time and then going back into the MBA. And so like I was going back to not really having an income anyway. I lived at home with my parents, so I didn't have really food and groceries and rent. Like my expenses were minimal. So yeah, I mean, and in terms of, what did people say and did they treat me differently? I mean, I didn't tell anybody. I hid it and I was embarrassed and ashamed of it. I didn't share it with anybody outside of my parents and, one friend of mine who we were doing a lot of trading together, and he had been, challenged financially as well as a result of, the markets falling and all that. So no one treated me differently because they didn't know.
But like, you still had a bank account.
Yeah, all your bank accounts are there. What happened? Literally, just your debts go away. I mean, your accounts, your loans, your credit cards, everything is frozen. Everything eventually, gets closed. You see it one day. The negative balances or the balance, the amounts you have owing are showing, and then one day, the bankruptcy is finalized. You're discharged. The debts literally fall off, and those accounts get closed. Eventually they fall off the bank's computer systems. But all your bank accounts, your income, any assets that you acquire, like savings that you have, from the point at which you like file for bankruptcy, you get to keep those. Like they don't take those away from you. Like there's a cutoff date, right? Where, okay, the date that they kind of reconcile, here are your assets and here are your liabilities. You're claiming bankruptcy. We're going to take your assets and we're going to pay off whatever liabilities you have remaining. So I had a car lease, for example. That car, essentially, pays off the lease and returned and all that. Like any savings I had in my accounts were used to lower the debt. So I had still some stocks and investments that I had made that, were very low in value, but there's value there. So all that stuff, essentially your assets are liquidated to pay your debts. And then there's a remaining debt. And that is eventually wiped, it's just, those accounts are all closed. The banks or the lenders eat those losses. And as of the date of that reconciliation, beyond that date, any savings or assets you accumulate are yours to keep.
And your parents were fine, like, because everything was in your name.
Yeah, that's right. So nobody had co-signed on anything, on any of the debt for me, which was a good thing. And I wouldn't have gotten into that situation if I had needed a co-signer, because I never would have asked for it.
I think the upside to your story, and this is something that I hear from credit counselors all the time, is there is such a stigma around bankruptcy, but it isn't that death sentence that people think it is. You go on. I mean, you're living proof that you can move forward and move past it and be incredibly successful.
Yeah, I mean, I there's definitely stigma associated with it, but you're exactly right in that there's recovery from it. I mean, I was having a conversation with somebody actually not too long ago who is a business owner, and and with everything that's gone on with COVID, her business is probably like she can't get out of her rent, and she's probably gonna go under, or like she doesn't see if a clear path to how she's going to get out of this, because it's a type of business that is people are on top of each other, and you're not going to be able to like reopen quickly. She won't be on that sort of first wave of businesses that are allowed to reopen, and the rent is so much, and it was just like it's an early stage business. Anyway, the point is, she was like, well, I just don't even know whether I've got some savings and I can continue to pay rent for another month or two, but like, why? I mean, maybe I don't know if I should, but the problem is she's like personally liable on the lease that she signed for the business, and that's not uncommon that small businesses, the owner has to actually personally sign those commercial leases. And it's a downtown property, and it's very expensive, and effectively she's on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars personally on the lease. Like if she doesn't try to make a go of the business, then she might potentially have to just claim bankruptcy personally. But she was like, oh, it's going to make me bankrupt if I just do this. And I sort of just challenged her to say, like, I think we're all programmed, and I was too, to be like, oh, bankruptcy, that means I've failed. It means it's the end game. That it's like the equivalent of if you're playing a video game. That's it. I'm out of the game. I've lost, and it's all over. I think I encouraged her to think about like, hey, I think you should just like think about bankruptcy. I'm not suggesting that you do it, but I think you should think through like what's involved in it. Actually look into the process, what the pros are, what the cons are. Think about it in your context. It's actually potentially a viable strategy for you to utilize it. It's there for a reason. It provides a benefit, with some cost. And I guess the point I'm making is I think there's a lot of stigma associated with it. I think people are programmed to say, oh, my absolute worst case scenario is bankruptcy, rather than, oh, bankruptcy is like an option I have. It's an avenue. It's a mechanism I can utilize. And when does it make sense to utilize it? When don't I? Rather than, oh, I've done everything else, and now I ended up in bankruptcy.
Now I'm starting to think there's a consumer proposal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you can have a consumer proposal, I think up to 200,000.
Yeah.
And that basically is saying you work with someone from the government anyway, and they work with your collectors, and you come to a reasonable expense, and then you basically work to reduce your debts to something that is you can pay off, and then you don't have to go through bankruptcy.
Right.
A bankruptcy though, and then that's a lot of hard work, right? You still, like, let's say you were $200,000 in debt. I don't know what they can come down to, but I don't know. Let's say it's $50,000. This is total ungrounded. I'm just coming up with numbers, but wouldn't it be better to just go like? It's kind of funny listening to you now because I feel like, well, yeah, just claim bankruptcy and then you're fine.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I haven't looked at it for a little while now. I mean, I did look at what a consumer proposal was at the time and had compared the two. And so, I won't remember all the details now to sort of what those exact differences are. But my interpretation of the differences anyway at that time was, oh, a consumer proposal really feels like a lot of the negatives without the same benefit. And I'd rather just wipe away all the debt if I'm going to have this black mark on my credit history. Now, I think that's probably an oversimplification. It might have been particularly true for my circumstances and maybe not for other people. So I wouldn't want to suggest that the other people write off consumer proposals as an option if you're kind of in a bind financially. But at the time, to me, for my circumstances, it felt like, oh, I'm going to have a pretty big mark against my finances. I think I don't think it lasts as long on your credit history.
I think it's 5 years.
Yeah. And I think the bankruptcy was 7.
So
to me, for 2 years, and the other thing was, it's not, I think you sort of negotiate. I don't think there's like a clear schedule for here's we eliminate 50% of your debt or 25% or 85%. I think it's kind of a negotiated thing.
Okay.
And so it was unclear to me how much debt I would still have left. And for 2 years put it this way, if you file a consumer proposal, you're going to have a hard time getting debt.
Right.
Even if it's not a bankruptcy, it's still like, oh, this person has financial troubles and lenders don't like that. And you're going to have a hard time getting access to credit. So I opted for bankruptcy.
Like, what was it like climbing? I mean, it doesn't sound like you really, the question is a little bit funny, but like, what was it like climbing out of bankruptcy?
Mm-hmm.
And like, what steps did that involve? Or was it basically like, okay, I'm at zero again? Like, did you have problems getting, obviously you can't have credit cards for 7 years pretty much, unless it's a secured credit card, I suppose. But what are like for 7 years, what are the downsides?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, so in my circumstances, and like, I'm going to sort of just give this caveat, like, my situation, I'm pretty privileged. I mean, I have upper middle class or middle class parents who I had a roof over my head and parents who loved me. And like, I wasn't out on the streets, and like a lot of people who are in bankruptcy are a lot more financially vulnerable than I was at the time. But it's the emotional side of it, and the feelings of shame, embarrassment, and stress are still very, very, very strong. And it's an awful and emotional experience, even if at the end of the day, again, like I wasn't going to be out on the streets. And like, as I just sort of described, well, I'm just reset and I'm still at a position where I'm back to zero. But most, young people who are going to university have come out with large, loans. And so in a lot of ways, I was still really, really lucky. So I'll sort of just caveat that. I understand that, but it was very, as I mentioned, the emotional side of it was very traumatic, like just very difficult. Just feeling bad about it. I didn't like the fact that I claimed bankruptcy, even if, oh great, my debt's magically gone. That didn't feel good to me. I wasn't in a position where I wanted to be somebody who couldn't pay back their debts. Number two, so I'm starting back at zero, so that's fine. Financially, I'm not so bad off. But then, now I go and I in my case, I did an MBA, I did a master's program in MBA, and then I came out and I started working. So I'm in my mid 20s now, and I'm, working with other, people of various ages or, but younger generally. And, you're in position, I was in the time where like we'd have to go out and expense things. We would take clients out or be out on business lunches or travel, like where we'd have to book hotels. And we didn't have corporate credit cards, so like we'd all put that on our own cards and expense the organization. Well, it gets difficult to like explain to people why you can't put that lunch bill on your credit card, because usually nobody wants to have to put it on their card because nobody wants to file the expense report after the fact. And so when I'm constantly the one like not putting, never stepping up to put the expense on my credit card, you kind of run out of excuses after a while. If we were booking, hotels or things like that for the team to go, like never being the one to put it on their card. I even got around that because I very quickly, out of wanting to be able to have a credit card, but also as a strategy to like build my credit history again, I did get a secured credit card. The most I could get was I think it was a $500 limit. So I had to send them $500 cash, and then they would give me a credit card with that limit. So that took care of like the problem with expensing a lunch here and there, but it didn't take care of the problem of like, I can't put that hotel bill or those flights on my credit card because it just wasn't a big enough limit. So that's really pretty embarrassing and causes a lot of stress anytime those situations come up. So that's kind of one. Number two, when you're in the investment world, I mean, I did an MBA where the focus was finance. I then was studying towards a CFA. I'm working as an investment analyst on Bay Street and surrounded by other investment professionals. The level of like anxiety around people finding out that you've been claimed bankruptcy as a result of blowing up your investment portfolio starts to become increasingly nerve-wracking because you're supposed to be an investment professional. And it didn't really matter that all happened before my, professional designations and my education. It's still, pretty embarrassing. And it's not uncommon that like if you're applying for a job or you're signing up for like an association or you want to get licensed to sell investments, that they will ask detailed questions around like, have you ever filed for bankruptcy? And so if there was any type of application for anything in that regards, I was always worried that they would ask if I had claimed bankruptcy, and then what would that do for my ability to, receive that licensing requirement or whatever those things were that I was, I wanted.
Because I mean, that even appears on like rent applications.
Yeah, right. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was still in a position where, I was still living at home. And that part of the reason why I did was because of the bankruptcy. So living at home longer than I might have, another byproduct of that. And so if you're not in a position where you've got somewhere to live, like rent or getting a mortgage is going to be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, so it's not exactly like the solution for every student graduating university to just wipe their student loans right now.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, there's a real cost to it, right? I mean, otherwise everybody would just, so the get out of jail free is too strong a term because there's a real cost, and there should be, right? Otherwise we don't want to incentivize people to just renege on their debts. But, for me, I think the issue is like, go big or go go home on it, right? Like, don't file bankruptcy for a $5,000 debt because it's just such a big cost to eat. If you can borrow that money, you can pay that back eventually. That's far better than to claim bankruptcy. But in my case, I felt like $200,000 was going to be a pretty big hole to try to dig out of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what you're doing to help other people make smarter financial decisions and do better with their money, like with Kindwealth. Where did that idea come from?
Oh boy, I don't even know where to start. There's such a cascading of factors. I would say my wife was the biggest influence on kind of changing my worldviews and shifting my priorities in life. That's not, I don't think, terribly uncommon that when you meet a partner, they have an impact on you. But my wife works in the international development humanitarian organization, and she's a nutritionist, does a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa. When I met her, I wanted to learn more about that. I took a sabbatical from my job at the time and spent 6 weeks volunteering in Sierra Leone around the work that they were doing in kind of microfinance, lending to small, poor borrowers to start a business. And it was it sounds like a bit of a bad cliche. I think another white guy goes to Africa story, but it was a very profound experience for me and really shaped and changed my worldview and priorities in the years that sort of ensued after coming back. And I'd been at a company called Morningstar, which is an investment research firm, and I spent 13 years there. When I left there, I really wanted to do something where I could more directly and immediately impact people who are kind of more financially challenged. So the idea behind Kindwealth was, there's a lot of financial advisors who the focus is like, everyone's trying to serve the high net worth clients, because the way that financial advisors price their model is they take a percentage of assets of whatever the client invests as their fee. It's typically, kind of 1%, can be higher, it can be lower. But when you take a percentage of what the client invests, the more money that client has, the better it is, the more profitable they are. And so because of the way that most advisors price their services, they're all fighting for the wealthiest Canadians. And it really bothered me that the vast majority of Canadians don't get any meaningful financial advice in this country. You can get help making investments, like with the advent of robo-advisors, which is wonderful. That's a big improvement. But if you need financial planning, which is like answering all sorts of other questions you have about your money, whether it comes to insurance or your work pension and benefits, or your cash flow and budgeting, or what happens to you to your money after you die, and do you need a will, and like there are 1,000,001 questions people have about their money, there's very little help being offered to the vast majority of Canadians who don't have $500,000 or $1 million of asset at a kind of a minimum before you could get real financial advice. And so I wanted to address that problem, and so I started Kindwealth to tackle that.
Yeah, I like that concept because it isn't just a matter of where do I put the money. It's what is my plan for the money, and that's the question. Is that a question that you help regular Canadians answer?
The idea is if I'm going to put it into a single phrase, it's we help people take control of their money so they can live life on their own terms. And I think money represents flexibility and freedom and control over your circumference. You need money for certain to do certain things. And so we help people take control of that. And a lot of that is putting a plan into place, and like, how much money should you be putting aside, and are you putting aside enough, and trying to help them say, like, are you going to be okay financially? Let's make sure we put that all into place. But it's also about helping them figure out, what do they want? Like, like just growing your assets, making more money is not a very good goal, because it's not actually, it's not well defined. You should usually have SMART goals, right? So they're specific, they're measurable, actionable. Just saying more money doesn't,
Yeah.
isn't enough. So we have people really define
Right. And what's the impetus to stick with the plan
it.
if you don't have a passionate reason behind
Yeah,
having that
100%.
plan in the first place? So there, I mean, there's so much splashy marketing around different investment organizations that have cropped up. What makes Kindwealth different?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, we only provide, as of right now, this may change going forward, but right now we only offer financial planning advice. So we don't sell any investment products or insurance products. So we don't accept any commissions. When our clients come to us, the only thing they pay us for is for our advice on what we think is best for the client. And because we don't sell any financial products, we don't get any commissions where you're worried about, oh, like this person sold me this piece of insurance or this investment because they're going to make money behind, get a kickback. We don't accept any of those, and we don't sell any products. And so the objectivity and the independence people really like, okay, this person looks competent and is qualified and experienced, and they don't have any financial incentive to tell me anything other than what they think is best for me. That's number one. We charge flat prices, like flat fees. So we don't charge a percentage of any assets. We just, hey, like your situation is this, has a certain amount of complexity, and we're going to charge you for the amount of time and effort it takes us. And we're going to charge a flat fee for that. And you can see exactly what you're paying us because it comes off out of your bank account or off your credit card. So there's no questions about how much you're paying us. Most Canadians don't really know what they pay for advice. And we're entirely virtual. So we do everything via video chat. We don't have any physical offices.
It's interesting because I would say like a few years ago, that would have made some Canadians concerned, especially potentially older Canadians who are used to doing face to face. But it gives you incredible flexibility, obviously, especially now that face-to-face meetings aren't possible. But have you found that takes a layer of, what would normally prevent someone from moving forward with finally getting a financial plan made? Is that something that makes it easier
That
for
it's
people?
virtual?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think, our demographic, we will serve anybody, but our sweet spot is kind of 30 to 49-year-olds, typically, people with kids, but it doesn't have to be. It can be single moms. It can be just individuals on their own. But it typically tends to be a younger demographic. So they're very comfortable working virtually. They typically are busy, as all of us, I think, are these days. It feels like busier and busier. So like they love the idea of not having to take time off in the middle of a week to go drive down to see their financial advisor. So I think that helps a lot. But I think a big part of it too is like the trust in the fact that the advice is independent. That's the number one reason people tell us they come to us. The virtual side of it, I think they like it, but I don't think that's the thing that's making people pull the trigger and finally get the advice. I think it's a combination of they feel like they can trust us because we don't accept commissions, and because they're facing life challenges now where the number of questions they have around their money is starting to feel overwhelming, and they realize they could get some help with that.
Yeah, I met my doctor on the internet, and afterwards I told my wife, I'm like, it was actually really nice because I didn't have the commute time, I didn't have the the setup time. He arrived on time, which is a rarity. So although it's more than virtual because you are providing that advice, I will say that's a thumbs up for me anyway for the virtual.
Yeah, I mean, let me just say one other thing on that. Like the other thing about it is the combination of the virtual delivery and the fact that we charge flat fees. It's a monthly fee model, so you don't have any long-term contracts. You pay an initial fee and then a monthly fee, and you can cancel it whenever you want. Between those two things, what happens is most financial advisors, the way they would work with you is they'd get to know you, they'd gather all your information in a meeting. What are all your assets, your liabilities, your income, expenses, all that stuff, your goals. And then they go back and build a financial plan, and then they come and deliver it to you in a second meeting, a follow-up meeting. And then they deliver all this advice and this big financial plan in a meeting. And that meeting can be, 2-3 hours, to get through everything. Because the idea is like, you don't want to have 3 or 4 or 5 meetings when you can just do it in 1 or 2, because you're not going to get paid more money by the client to have more meetings, and everybody's driving back and forth, seeing each other in person. You want to do it as efficiently as possible. But the problem with that is that the advice you're getting in 2 hours, where the advisors, if they even do all this work for you, they're telling you about insurance and estate planning and cash flow and budgeting and investments and all these different things in one meeting. It's hard to process all of that because it feels overwhelming. It is overwhelming. And then number two, you then go back to this position where like, okay, well, we'll see you in 12 to 18 months and we'll update things then. And it allows you in the interim to like not do a bunch of the things that you were supposed to do, like call the lawyer and set up, increase the contributions you're making to your work pension plan or whatever those action items are from the advice. So you can kind of forget about those things, not get around to them, never do them, and B, get it like revert back to old habits, which I think a lot of people share, which is like, I don't want to think about my money. I'm too busy, and or it brings me stress because I feel I'm not doing good enough, or that where I don't like looking at my debt. And so you just sort of take your bills, you stuff them into drawers, and you don't think about things. And you can easily revert back to that because you're not going to see your advisor for another year and a half. And our model, we actually see people, we split, we don't deliver all the advice in a single meeting. We actually break the planning process into smaller segments and we tackle topics one by one. And we have a meeting just on that topic. And it's only a half an hour, 45-minute meeting. And then we'll have another meeting in 2-3 months on a different topic and we'll address that one. And so we've got these more, like we might have 4 or 5 or 6 meetings with a client in a year rather than just one. And so there's an accountability partner, there's a coaching, a behavioral, like you can't forget about your money because you know that in 2 more months we're going to have another meeting. So you're keeping your money top of mind. And I think maybe more than anything, just being aware and conscious of your money and your plan and what things you should be doing is maybe the most important factor to financial success. It's hard to pick just one, but that's certainly on the short list of most important things you can do. And so this model of like virtual delivery allows you to do that in a way that an in-person meeting doesn't.
So given our current climate, COVID, and the economy, then I assume you'll probably be pretty busy.
Yeah, I mean, I was worried that we have been. It's been our best, kind of 2-3 months. 2 months in particular has been our busiest. But I was worried that like the very fact that our fees are so much more transparent and it comes off your credit card statement, off your credit card or out of your bank account, that people might, because money's getting tighter and people are more worried about their income going forward, that we might lose clients and or not have as many people reach out to us. But that hasn't been the case so far. We haven't lost any clients and we've had more people coming to us than we have before. So I think the concerns around, I need to talk to a financial professional is outweighing the, can I afford it and my income. So I'm happy to see that because this is a new model, this pricing. Like I don't know of maybe 1 or 2 others that are experimenting with it. It's very popular in the US, but I'm really happy to see that it's holding up well in this type of environment.
Awesome. If it's okay with you, we'll move into our rapid fire questions.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds great.
Okay. The first question, what is in your wallet?
I don't carry a wallet. I have one of those like credit card holders that you stick to the back of your phone.
Yeah.
And I've got my ID, 2 credit cards, and a bank card.
Nice.
Awesome. What is one book you think everybody should read?
Oh, man. Does it have to be a financial book?
Nope. Not at all.
Okay. There's an endless list. Winners Take All by Anand Giridharadas. I could spell it for you, but I won't bother. If you type in Winners Take All, it's a book about the ways in which those people and organizations that say they're doing things that are positive for the world sometimes are just making the world a worse place. So it's a critique of the sort of social do-gooders out there. It's, I think, a healthy one.
That sounds interesting, yeah. What movie should everyone watch?
Oh, The Shawshank Redemption.
Did you read the book?
Classic.
I have not, and I would like to.
Yeah.
I should.
You should, yeah.
Given that, we all have a lot of time at home, what are you binge watching right now?
What did I just, so I'm binge watching Fargo right now on Netflix. I didn't realize, but they did a Netflix series on the old movie Fargo. Apparently it's all a real story, which I find 100% a true story. Like all of the events actually took place. That's what they say at the beginning of this thing. And it's unbelievable. I actually have to go check to see if it's true, but the whole web of things that happen is mind-blowing.
Agreed. It's an incredible show. I love that show. If you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
Probably super fly. Flying would be fun. Just because it's fun.
Yeah. You don't have to pay for the plane tickets.
Yeah.
If you could have everyone in the world read one of your tweets, so that's 280 characters. We're not going to nitpick here because we're putting you on the spot. You have to compose it on the fly. But what would that tweet say?
Oh man, that's a really great question and really hard. Boy, I'd want it to say something about like you aligning your. I think that if everybody, and I realize not everybody's in the position to do this financially, but if to the extent you're able to align the way you make your money and the things that you want to positive impact that you want to make, things that are important to you, that you value, that you think make the world a better place, the better. You'll just be far more successful at what you do and will end up making the world a better place for other people. And if everybody would do that, that would make, I think just the whole world would be so much better off. So I would have some sort of like motivational quote about that.
Money doesn't buy happiness.
Yeah.
But in that essence, what's your number? And that's a question like, how much money would it take you to walk away from everything and be happy?
Like walk away from what?
Walk away from like, I mean, you could live your dream life if you wanted to, if your dream life included buying an island and living there with your family and friends, great. But if, or is it just sort of continuing with Kindwealth and, living comfortably and
so there's no amount of money that I would just like go walk away and then like go lie on a beach somewhere, or not like work towards something I'm passionate about. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely like more money. I mean, I'm not averse to it, but it wouldn't make me walk away from like doing the things that I'm passionate about. I think like money is a byproduct of doing something that you love when you have the financial flexibility. I realize some people are so financially vulnerable, they don't have the choice. If you're privileged enough to have that choice, that's how I've structured things for me. So I don't know if that's a clear answer or not.
That's the exact answer. And nobody ever gives the same answer, but I'm always interested. Yeah. I think it puts people in a position to answer something about life in general.
100%.
Well, thank you very much, David.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun, and I love the podcast and the idea of like having these conversations around money. It's really, really helpful for people. Yeah. So kudos.
And now it's time to take a withdrawal from the knowledge bank. Need life insurance? If there is anyone relying on you financially, you need life insurance. The day that you die, your income stops. But your dependents, whether it's your kids, your parents, or anyone relying on you financially, they can use that money to pay the funeral expenses, your mortgage, and any other debts. Your family also needs to cover the ongoing expenses like groceries and utility bills. A life insurance payout will cover those expenses and help the survivors try to live a normal life without you. So how much life insurance do you need? Well, according to the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association, the average Canadian protection per household was $417,000 in 2018. Wondering how much you should have? Well, there's a rule of thumb known as the DIME formula. Let's break this down. D is for debt. Any debts you have to people, credit cards, car loans, anything, add all your debts up together. Next, the I is for income. If your salary goes away, how much money would your family need coming in regularly to afford their current lifestyle? M is for mortgage. Whatever is left on your mortgage, if you can clear it off in one lump sum, awesome. Without a mortgage payment to worry about, your family may not need much of the I in the income. E is for education. Think of your kids. Do you want them to attend university? Will it be in Canada or abroad? How much money do they need to go to university without worrying about money so they can focus on learning? So, there's the DIME formula. Debt, income, mortgage, education. Add up all your debts, income replacement, total mortgage, and what you want to leave your kids for education, and that's how much you need. But it's only a rule of thumb. If your house is $1 million on its own, maybe you only cover a portion of it. The higher the payout, the higher your monthly premiums. What kind of life insurance do you need? Yes, there are a few types to suit different situations, but the big two are term and whole life. Term covers you for a specific period of time, from 5 years to 30 years. Whole life covers you, well, you guessed it, for your whole life. But as you get closer to retirement, the goal would be that your mortgage is paid off, your kids are already graduated university, you have no debts, and you've put money away in your RSPs and TFSAs and the stock market. So if you die at 65, the surviving members of your family aren't left with a massive financial burden because your savings are there to help cover any remaining expenses. So if you die at 65, the surviving members of your family aren't left with a massive financial burden. That's because your savings are there to help cover any remaining expenses. Arguably, at 65, you don't need life insurance anymore. At 65, life insurance is also much more expensive. It's much cheaper when you're younger. A 30-year term life insurance policy at age 35 for an otherwise healthy person will be about $30 to $40 a month, a small price to pay to protect your family from financial hardship and give them the freedom to move on. You can compare life insurance quotes at Ratehub.ca with a bit of information and a few clicks. So do you need life insurance? Unless you're incredibly wealthy and have no debts or mortgage payments, it's worth having. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Beat Chemist for providing us with our music. Find him on SoundCloud. I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your own day and investing it in yourself to get smarter about money. Head over to Ratehub.ca to learn more about making smarter financial decisions. If you want to thank us, please leave a review on Apple Podcast and follow us on Spotify. Thank you for listening. Let's help Canadians choose better with their finances.
The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views and opinions expressed by Ratehub employees are those of the employees and do not necessarily reflect the views of Ratehub Inc. or any of its sponsors or officials. This is for general use. We're not certified or licensed advisors.
Yeah, we just don't want to get sued.